The world is full of shadows. They lurk in the corners of our vision. They whisper in the stillness of the night. Most are harmless, fleeting things, born of light and dissipating in an instant. But some shadows linger. These are the shadows that move, the ones that seem to have a life of their own. They watch us. They follow us. And sometimes they come for us. These are the stories of those shadows. Tales whispered around campfires, accounts shared in hushed tones, stories that send shivers down your spine and make you afraid to turn off the light. Read on if you dare, but be warned, once you step into the shadows, you may never find your way out. The small town of Hollow Creek was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. It was a quiet, unassuming place where everyone knew each other, and the days passed by in a predictable, almost comforting routine, until the shadows started to move. At first it was just a whisper, a rumor that spread through the town like wildfire. It began subtly, a flicker at the edge of someone's vision, a fleeting movement that was gone as quickly as it appeared, a fleeting glimpse of darkness darting behind a building. People would turn expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. Most dismissed it as an overactive imagination, a trick of the light. They laughed it off, not wanting to believe that something strange was happening in their peaceful town. But then the sightings became more frequent, more brazen. The shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. The shadows grew bolder. They lingered longer. They seemed almost curious, as if they were studying the townsfolk. They seemed to watch, observing, waiting for something. One night, a young woman named Sarah was walking home alone. She'd just finished a late shift at the diner. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the distant hum of the streetlights. The streetlights buzzed, casting long, eerie shadows. The air was thick with an unsettling silence. Sarah felt a chill despite the summer air. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. As she passed the mouth of a darkened alleyway, she saw it. A movement that made her heart skip a beat. A tall, shadowy figure detached itself from the darkness. It was as if the shadows themselves had come to life. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding towards her. There was something almost hypnotic about its movements. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stopped at the edge of the light, its features obscured by the darkness. It was as if it was testing the boundary between light and shadow. It stood there, watching her. And then, just as slowly as it had appeared, it retreated back into the shadows. The darkness swallowed it whole. Shaking, Sarah ran the rest of the way home. Her mind raced with what she had just witnessed. She told her friends and family about what she had seen. She described the figure in detail, hoping someone would believe her, but they dismissed it as a figment of her imagination. They couldn't believe that something so strange could happen in their town. They told her it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a passing car or a swaying tree. But Sarah knew what she had seen. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And she knew that the shadows in Hollow Creek were hiding something sinister, something that was lurking just out of sight, something that was watching them all, waiting for the right moment to strike. One day Sarah disappeared, vanished without a trace. Her room was left untouched, as if she had simply stepped out for a moment. The townsfolk searched for days but found nothing. They combed every inch of the town and the surrounding woods. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. Her disappearance left a void that no one could fill, except for one chilling detail, a single black feather. It was found lying on the ground where the shadow had stood in the alleyway. Found lying on the ground where the shadow had stood in the alleyway. A silent, ominous reminder of the darkness that had taken her. The abandoned Cranbrook Mental Asylum stood on a hill overlooking the town. A silent sentinel of a bygone era, a crumbling monument to despair and madness, its walls bearing the scars of countless tormented souls. Locals whispered tales of the horrors that had transpired within its walls, stories passed down through generations. It was said that the patients of Cranbrook hadn't truly left, their spirits forever bound to the place of their suffering, that their tormented souls lingered, trapped within the decaying building, unable to find peace. And that something dark and hungry watched over them, a malevolent presence that fed on their despair. A group of teenagers, eager to prove their bravery and dismiss the old tales, decided to spend the night in the asylum. They were armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of teenage bravado, ready to face whatever lay within. They didn't believe the stories, convinced that they were just the product of overactive imaginations. They were just stories, after all, meant to scare children and keep them away from the old building. They arrived at the asylum as the sun began to set, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and welcome them. The building loomed above them, its windows like vacant eyes, staring down with a cold, unfeeling gaze. A cold wind whistled through the broken panes, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else. Something faintly metallic, like the tang of old blood. As they stepped inside, the air grew heavy, oppressive. It felt as though the very walls were closing in on them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own nervous laughter, which echoed eerily through the empty halls. They explored the asylum, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing glimpses of the building's tragic past. They found padded cells with restraints still attached to the walls, a grim reminder of the suffering that had taken place there. They found medical equipment coated in dust and rust, relics of a time when the asylum was still in use. And they found the shadows. The shadows were everywhere, lurking in the corners, skulking down the hallways as if waiting for something. They seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive, moving with a sinister purpose that sent chills down their spines. One of the teenagers, a boy named Jake, swore he saw a figure standing at the end of a hallway, watching them with unblinking eyes. A tall, gaunt figure with long, sharp fingers that seemed to beckon him closer. But when he shone his light on it, it was gone, leaving only an empty hallway and the echo of his own heartbeat. As the night wore on, the teenager's bravado began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The shadows seemed to grow bolder, the air grew colder, and the whispers started, softly at first, barely audible, but then louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, whispering their names, mocking their fear. The voices seemed to come from all around them, growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. Panicked, the teenagers decided to leave, their earlier bravado now completely gone. But as they turned to go, they found the door to the asylum had slammed shut. They rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. They kicked at the door, their panic rising with each passing second, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. Suddenly, the lights on their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The oppressive silence was broken only by their ragged breaths. Screams filled the air as the shadows descended upon them, their dark forms closing in from all sides. The next morning, the sun rose on an empty asylum. The teenagers were gone, vanished without a trace, as if they had never been there at all. Only their flashlights remained scattered on the floor, their batteries drained and lifeless. And a single black feather lay on the doorstep as if left as a calling card. A final, chilling reminder of the night's events. Section 4. The forest beneath watching trees. The old forest on the outskirts of town had always been a place of mystery, a place where the line between reality and legend blurred, a place where the trees grew close together, their branches intertwined, blocking out the sun and casting eerie shadows on the forest floor, a place where the air was always still and heavy, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was said that the forest was haunted by the spirits of those who had become lost within its depths, never to return. that their souls were tethered to the trees, forced to wander for eternity, their whispers carried by the wind, and that something ancient and evil watched over them. A guardian of the forest's dark secrets. A young woman named Emily, a seasoned hiker and skeptic of the supernatural, decided to camp in the forest for a weekend, determined to debunk the myths. She wanted to prove to herself and others that there was nothing to fear but her own imagination, that the stories were just that, stories. She set up camp near a stream, the sound of the water a soothing counterpoint to the oppressive silence of the forest, a small comfort in the growing darkness. As she gathered firewood, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. The trees seemed to press in on her, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to touch her, to pull her into their embrace. The shadows beneath them writhed and shifted, taking on the shapes of animals and faces, as if the forest itself was alive and watching. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the hooting of owls. Each sound seemed to echo in the stillness. Every sound seemed amplified, closer than it should be, as if the forest was drawing nearer, closing in on her. Emily lay in her tent, listening to the sounds of the forest, her heart pounding in her chest, each beat a reminder of her vulnerability. She told herself it was just the wind, just an animal, just her imagination. But the unease lingered. But then she saw it, a movement in the corner of her eye. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, detached itself from the base of a tree, moving with a purpose. It moved slowly, deliberately towards her tent, as if it knew she was there. Emily held her breath, her mind racing, her body frozen in fear. She fumbled for her flashlight, her fingers trembling, the small device, her only defense against the encroaching darkness. The shadow stopped outside her tent, its form shifting and changing as if it was deciding what to do next. It seemed to be looking inside, watching her, studying her. Summoning her courage, Emily flicked on her flashlight and shone it at the shadow, hoping to dispel the darkness. But there was nothing there. Only the empty forest floor, undisturbed. Only the empty forest floor, as if the shadow had never been there at all. Relief washed over Emily, followed by a wave of shame. She had let her fear get the better of her. She was letting her imagination get the better of her. There was nothing to be afraid of. There was nothing to be afraid of. She repeated the mantra to herself, trying to believe it. But as she turned to crawl back into her tent, she saw it. A small, undeniable sign, a single black feather lying on top of her backpack. Emily's blood ran cold. She was not alone. The forest had left its mark. The shadows had found her, and they were not going to let her go. Section 5. Conclusion. You are not alone. The shadows are always there, lurking at the edge of your vision, whispering in the darkness, watching, waiting. You may think you are safe in the light of day, but the shadows are patient. They can wait. They will always be there, waiting for you to let your guard down, waiting for you to make a mistake. So be careful where you tread. Be mindful of the shadows, and never ever let them catch you alone. For once they have you, they will never let you go.